of deserted after-hour streets and of a state capital's grandiose vacancies. It was a city with nobody in it, just a few flitting shadows and some heaps of plowed snow. The hospital complex included a parking garage, but he circled the inner-city blocks until he found a free meter. Not yet 6 o'clock, it was quite dark. Richard hurried through the iron air to the bright lights of the warm hospital spaces. He was the last of this particular extended family to arrive, and the least. A receptionist and her computer directed him to the correct floor, and after he had sat in the waiting room long enough to skim the cream from 2 issues of Sports Illustrated, Joan hurried out to him from some deeper, more intimate chamber of the maternity wing, like a harried hostess, determined to make every guest, however inconsequential, feel welcome. She had put on weight, with her contentment as Mrs. Vanderhaven. Andy evidently didn't impose the slimming stress of her first marriage, and wore a beltless yellow dress with small flowers that seemed old-fashioned, a back-to-nature dress from the 60s. Her face, broader than he remembered it, was rosy with the event overtaking her. She was becoming a grandmother, and the tropical warmth of the hospital air. "We didn't know if you'd be coming or not," she explained. "I said I would," Richard protested mildly. "We didn't know if Ruth would let you." "How would she stop me? She thought it was a terrific idea. Give them all my love," she said. Joan shot him a quick, blue-eyed glance, uncertain, as she often had been, of how ironical he was being. She seemed, in the years since they were married, to have lost her eyelashes, and her hair had turned gray above her wide brow. "Factually," she said, "they broke the waters an hour ago, and now we're just sitting around waiting for the contractions to take hold. Judy's in good spirits, though a little apprehensive." This last description seemed to fit Joan as well. She was shy with him. Their telephone conversations, which on the excuse of the children had persisted long into their second marriages, had dwindled these last years. Months of silence between them went by now, and he did not know when he had last been as alone with her as he was in this hotly lit waiting room, with its rows of plastic chairs in alternating colors, and its yammering television set up near the ceiling. It was the Sunday of the Super Bowl, and the announcers were revving up. Even the female members of the news teams were supposed to be excited. Joan had been bending over awkwardly to look him in the face with her hands braced on her thighs, and now, perhaps in response to a pang in her back, she suddenly sat down in the plastic chair next to his. His chair was dirty cream in color, hers scuffed orange. The molded shapes were for narrow people, and Richard and Joan had to edge away to avoid touching rumps. "Who wouldn't be apprehensive?" he asked. "And who is we?" He had taken off his overcoat but was still wearing a tweed sports jacket and uncomfortably felt the heat of her proximate body. But Joan seemed to be rapidly relaxing. "Oh," she said, "Paul and Paul's sister, she's a nurse, as you know, but not at this hospital, but they let her come sit with us in the pre-delivery room, and Andy and me and, of course, Judy and the little stranger." "Some crowd," he said. "How's Paul acting?" His son-in-law, whose blonde hair was already thinning in front, wore a ponytail, and had always seemed to Richard insolently tall, as if he had just drawn himself up a few extra inches in a kind of full-body sneer. Richard had never quite known what the word weedy meant applied to a person, but Paul Wysocki had helped him to understand. A weedy person was a tall, dry stalk you wanted to pull up and throw away. Richard was surprised the marriage had lasted 5 years. "Wonderfully," Joan said with defensive emphasis. "Very tender with Judy, and very confident. He didn't miss a single birthing class, you know, and is all set to breathe with her. He brought her favorite book of poems, E. E. Cummings, to read to her as a distraction if she needs it." "How do you read E. E. Cummings aloud? All those staggered letters and open spaces." "We heard him himself do it, don't you remember? The year he gave the Norden lectures." Cummings had been a small, quite bald man in a tuxedo, very precise in manner, reading everything, Wordsworth, Dante, his own prose and poetry, in a fluting voice that never faltered or slipped, up there on the cavernous stage of Sanders Theatre. Richard and Joan had stood together in line in the Cambridge winter to get into the theatre, whose vast neo-Gothic space was murmurous and steaming with student excitement. For an instant, he and this plump elderly woman beside him had become a pair of worn binoculars focused on that animated, bright-headed homunculus lodged deep in the transparent mass of lost time. He was jointly and privately